So here I am re-recording my first sermon after the mini sabbatical, but it does give me a chance to try again, maybe get some things more clear that I didn't have completely clear yesterday. So let's go. I want to talk about, or yesterday I talked about, and I want to talk about now for a few minutes, the peace of God. And, that's one of the things that people really look forward to when they become Christians. Maybe something they're seeking when they're not Christians is to find peace, because this life is crazy. There's a lot that goes on, life gets thrown at us. We often find ourselves feeling like we're kind of sinking and not sure sort of what to do or how to handle it. And God promises peace, right? Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest." And that rest is supposed to be peace and joy and the other fruits of the Spirit. So I want to talk about that. I heard a really fun story a few weeks ago about T.D. Jakes, right? Do you know who that is? Famous American pastor. People love his preaching. I've actually never gotten that into it. I'm not sure I see what the huge deal is, but I'm definitely the minority. Most people think he's just a fantastic preacher. But you don't need to know that for this story to sort of hit. What you need to know is he's a fairly large man, and he's afraid of flying. I don't know if anybody else is afraid of flying. I'm not, but I have family members that get nervous when they fly. Apparently, T.D. Jakes is afraid of flying, and he was on a flight one time, and there was some turbulence, right? And the huge fear of anyone who is afraid of flying, you don't want turbulence, and there was some turbulence, and he's gripping the handrest, and he's kind of hemming and hawing like you do when you're anxious and you're worried and you're kind of upset, and your peace has been stolen, right? So the story is that in this one flight where there was some turbulence, the pilot comes on and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. Please leave your seatbelts on because this turbulence is going to last for a bit longer." All right, so Jakes is already kind of agitated. At this point, he's, hemming and hawing and just, making those little noises that you make sometimes when you're anxious. And there's a little girl sitting next to him, and she's not nervous at all. She's been reading a book the whole time, not concerned, not scared, nothing. But when the pilot makes his announcement and Jakes gives this big sigh of kind of nervous energy, she notices that the person sitting next to her is very nervous. And so in an attempt to comfort her, she taps him on the hand and says, "Don't worry, sir, it's going to be okay. If you need to, you can hold my hand." I love that. I love that story. If you need to, you can hold my hand. It reminds me of what I think Jesus would say to a lot of us when we're going through hard times or turbulent times in our lives. Don't worry, I'm here, and if you need to, you can hold my hand and we'll go through this together. I mean, I was thinking about just all kinds of situations where that might come up. You go to the doctor, you get sort of bad news. Jesus might, grab your hand in the waiting room, say, "Hey, don't be afraid. I'm here. It'll be okay. If you need to, you can hold my hand." Or an argument breaks out at work, and you say some things that you regret, and you're anxious about the consequences of stuff that you said. Not that that's ever happened to anyone. And I can imagine, Jesus just kind of tapping us on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, it's gonna be okay. I'm here with you, and if you need to, you can hold my hand." Credit card bill comes, right? It's way bigger than you expected. I just got back from 6 weeks of travel. I'm worried about the credit card bills, right? I don't know if this ever happened to you, but it's going to be bad, but you don't realize how bad until the bill actually comes. It's like twice what you thought it was going to be. And I can imagine Jesus tapping us on the shoulder and saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you spent on..." No, I'm just kidding. He wouldn't say, "It's going to be okay. I'm here. And you're going to have to pay the balance, but I'm here with you. I'm going to walk through it with you." So many things in our fast-paced world that can cause us to be afraid, to kind of lose the peace of Christ. And I think Jesus over and over and over again would just remind us that he's there. He's with us. And that when and if we need him to, not only can we grab his hand, but he will grab our hands. If you have a Bible, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 14. We're going to do a little series of sermons from the Gospel of Matthew. Starting in chapter 14, we're going to go through the next few chapters. And one of the things to know about Matthew is that he's very precise in the way that he tells stories. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But before I read, I just want to let you know, I want to talk from this passage about some of the ways and the extent to which God's hand and help is available to us when we're in trouble or when we're anxious or when we're worried. And I also want to talk about one of the common reasons why we end up in those situations in the first place, even when we're Christian, even when we might have turned the problem or the thing that's causing us anxiety over to Jesus. There is a very common mistake that Christians make, which leads us into these places where we're anxious and worried. So Matthew chapter 14, beginning with verse 22, it says this. It says, "Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd." This is right after the feeding of the 5,000, so they're all tired, they've been worried, and they need a period of rest. So immediately he puts them in the boat, sends them off, says, "Hey, I'm going to catch you later." So verse 23, "So after he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night he was alone there, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage, it's I, don't be afraid.' 'Lord, if it's you,' Peter replied, 'tell me to come to you on the water.' 'Come,' Jesus said. And so Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.' And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. 'You of little faith,' he said, 'why did you doubt?' And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And those who were in the boat worshipped Jesus, saying, 'Truly you are the Son of God.'" Now, as I mentioned, Matthew has a particular way of telling his memory and understanding of the story of Jesus. And it's very detail-oriented, it's very precise. I think that's probably why, if you're familiar with the Chosen TV series, I think that's probably why the series made a really interesting artistic choice. You know, it's based on the scriptures, but they take artistic license and they try to imagine backstories to a lot of the things that we have in our Bible. And one of the backstories is that they imagine Matthew being autistic, kind of just slightly on the autism spectrum, but really good with numbers, a little bit some of the sort of typical tics and different ways of relating that autistic people have. And one of the manifestations of that is an eye for detail. He notices things that other people don't notice. That kind of thing. And so there's this great scene actually in the show. John, the disciple John who writes the Gospel of John, is making notes and writing down some of the stories and asking people about their experiences with Jesus. And he asks everybody, when was the first time that you met Jesus? And he asked Matthew, and Matthew says, well, it was the 4th morning of the 3rd week of the month of Adar, sometime between the 2nd hour. Fantastic, right? And John says, it doesn't have to be precise. And Matthew, just kind of puzzled, why wouldn't it be precise? When I write mine, it's going to be precise. And so he's detail-oriented, he's precise, the details really matter. And with that in mind, I want to highlight a detail that you may have missed in the story. When Peter gets out of the boat to come to Jesus on the water, I want you to notice that it's not Jesus' idea for Peter to get out of the boat. Jesus okays it, but it's not his idea. Jesus gives permission, but the idea to get out of the boat is actually Peter's idea, not Jesus's. Everybody is actually safe in the boat. I know that it says it's been buffeted by the waves, but these are fishermen. This isn't their first storm on the water. There's no evidence that they are afraid in the boat because of the waves. And I've missed this so many times when I've read this. I always just assumed that they were afraid in the boat, but it doesn't say that. It says that they were terrified when they thought they saw a ghost walking out towards them on the water, which, makes perfect sense, because even if you're a hardened fisherman, ghosts are scary. But it doesn't say that they were afraid. In fact, it says that Jesus was walking out towards them, presumably to join them in the boat. He wanted to be with them in the boat. And it's only then when he says, don't be afraid, it's me, that Peter says, I got an idea. If it's really you, Lord, command me to come to you. And I'm going to jump right out of here and I'm going to walk right across that water just like you're doing, right? I'm embellishing a little bit, but Jesus says, okay, come. There's no indication that there's any need for this miracle. Again, the disciples are safe in the boat and Jesus is coming to them. So no one's in danger. They aren't afraid once they realize it's Jesus and not a ghost. They're used to waves. Jesus is already approaching them. So why does Peter want to get out of the boat? I think that happens a lot to us. There may be a storm in our lives. There may be something a little bit difficult, but we're not in any danger. There's not any real problem, but we still pray, Lord, deliver me from this situation, when actually the Lord is coming to join us, to walk with us through the situation, to build character, but we don't want the character. What we want is the deliverance. There's no evidence. Think about the story itself, right? Like, there's no reason for Peter to want to walk. There's no need for Peter to walk on the water. There's no evidence that he prayed about it. The Bible doesn't say that he sort of meditated and considered it thoroughly. The Bible doesn't say he consulted with his friends. Hey, what do you guys think? Should I ask Jesus if I can should I jump out of the boat and try to walk on the water myself? There's no evidence of any of that. His desire to walk on the water to Jesus is just kind of a spur of the moment, fast-paced decision like many of us make in life. There's not a whole lot of thought to it. And then, of course, he asks, Jesus gives permission. That permission doesn't mean that it was his idea. It doesn't even mean he thought it was a good idea. I think a lot of times God gives permission for us to do things that God kind of knows this may not go well. But I'm going to allow it because you want to give it a shot and you need to learn. I think there's a lot of that happens. I don't know if anybody watching or listening to this has ever had a decision that you made end up sort of not going like you expected. I think if you're over about 2 years old, you've got to have memories of this kind of stuff. And a lot of times it's you feel like you have to make a decision fast, and so you just kind of decide, you don't give it too much thought, right? Like, there's a business opportunity. If you don't take it now, you're never going to get it. If you don't buy this stock now, it's going to go up and you're going to miss the thing. Or, that person's cute. And if I don't ask him out now, someone else is going to ask him out and they're never going to be available again. And so you just do something because you feel like you just have to make a quick decision. And if you're like me, a lot of times you end up sort of in over your head because you made a decision without understanding the full situation. So I think that's what happens to Jesus. To Peter. Jesus gives permission, but it's not his idea. Now, when you're a Christian and you've made a rash decision, or a lot of times when you made any decision, but it's your decision and you didn't give too much thought to it, people of faith, what we often do is then we ask God to bless the decision that we made. So we say, okay, God, I've decided to do this. This is what I'm doing. This is what I've done. This is what my heart is set on. Now, Lord, would you please bless my plan? I think that's backwards, and it sometimes can almost be ludicrous. Like I thought of a kind of a safe example that probably we can all relate to. Like, who among us has ever been like, you forgot to eat when you should have, and you're tired and hungry now, and you don't want to chop up vegetables, and you don't want to cook at home. So before you know it, miraculously, you end up in the McDonald's drive-thru, right? And so before you know it, you're sitting there and you got a Big Mac and a large fry and a supersized drink. And at that point, you should say a blessing over the food. So you say something like, oh, Lord, bless this Big Mac and large fry and supersized Coke to nourish our bodies. And so we make our plan, we do our thing, and then we ask God to bless it. And sometimes it's just ridiculous, right? Like, I imagine that sometimes God's just something that like, where's the hidden camera? This has got to be some kind of joke. This has got to be a prank. In my experience, one of the biggest reasons that I sort of lose the peace of Christ, that I find myself in a panic, feeling like I'm sinking, feeling like I'm going to drown, is when I make a decision that I want to make, when I get my heart set on something, when I take action, and instead of asking God what I should do, I go ahead and make my choice, and then I ask God to bless what I'm either already planning to do or already have done. And I end up in over my head so often. And I'd be willing to bet, I know you guys, I know many of you struggle with the same thing. You have this idea for a way to make a little extra money, a side hustle maybe, and it just seems like it's going to transform your life. You don't have time to think about it. You don't have time to pray about it. You just have to do it. Lord, bless what I've done. Or you have an idea. I know how I'm going to convince my boss to change directions, or I know how I'm going to fix my spouse or my kids. And before praying about it, before seeking guidance from God about what it is that you should do, or if you should do this, that, or the other, instead of seeking guidance, we seek blessing on the thing that we've already done. And so often this ends in anxiety and things not going well for me. And I know it's got to be true for you as well. Instead, what we want to do as Christians is we want to get in the habit of asking God for direction before we have our hearts and our minds set on a plan, or God forbid, before we've actually even done what it is that we think we should do. We want to get in the habit of asking God, should I do this? Or what should I do before we do it, and ask God to bless it. And I guarantee if you can make that shift, instead of like Peter just impetuously saying, hey, Lord, get me out of this situation. Let me come walk to you on the boat. If instead we recognize that God is already with us and offering us his hand of comfort and strength and offering us his guidance. That's the goal. But now, if you're like me, and I know many of you are like me, not all of you, but many of you are like me, I don't think it's in my nature to see a problem and pause and seek guidance. What usually happens to me is I see a problem and my first thought is, I wonder what God thinks I should do about this. My first thought is never that. My first thought is always, oh, I think I know what we should do, right? I think I know, and so I by nature, I think I'm more of a fixer. And over and over again, you kind of get in trouble when you do that. And if you've ever found yourself, or if you find yourself right now in kind of one of those situations where that happened to you, and you jumped the gun and you didn't ask for guidance, and now you're in trouble and you need help, there's good news in this passage. And the good news is that Peter getting out of the boat was not Jesus' idea. He okayed it. He said, sure, you can give this a shot. But it wasn't what Jesus wanted. Jesus wanted to join them in the boat. So it wasn't Jesus' idea. But despite that, when Peter began to sink, Jesus didn't mock him and say, well, you should have asked before you jumped. Jesus had compassion on him. He saw he was in trouble. He reached out his hand. He said, let me grab you. And he grabbed him and he saved him. And if you're in a situation where you're in over your head, God has not abandoned you. God is not angry with you. God is not even surprised that you did something that got yourself in trouble. God is with you. Just like that little girl with TD Jakes. God is tapping you on the hand saying, don't be afraid. I'm with you. It's going to be okay. Here's my hand. I'm going to save you. We have a God, by his very nature, is a saving God. And that salvation may take a little time. It might not happen in the way that you thought or the way that you would have done it. But relief will come because that is who God is. God doesn't hold grudges. God is a saving God. But for those of you who, at least at the moment, are not in over your heads, or you're not aware that you're in over your head yet, learn the spiritual discipline of asking for guidance before asking for permission. Learn the spiritual gift of pausing, recognizing that you don't have all the information about any decision you're going to make. You can't see the past and the whole present or the future. Remember that not everything that looks like a great idea, not everything that looks like a simple, fix, turns out to be that way because there are things that you can't see. But we have access through prayer to a God who sees all, knows all, is never fooled by the hype or by the misdirection, never gets to the end of the line and says, gosh, I didn't see that coming, or I had no idea about that part of this situation. We have a God who doesn't have that problem. We have a God who promises that when we seek his wisdom, when we seek his guidance, he promises to give it to us in abundant supply. And we have a God who loves us more than we can ever imagine. And yes, we have a God who is more than happy and able and available to pull us out of the deep waters when we find ourselves in over our heads. But I believe we also have a God who would much prefer to be consulted beforehand and to provide guidance so we're not drowning in the first place. Amen.